Hello and welcome to my quick and dirty review of the Ricoh KR-10. I have previously done a preview video in which I discuss the history, background, and general feature set of this camera. Please see that preview video for those details. Today I'm just going to talk about the functionality of the camera based upon my experience using it. So I acquired this camera not too long ago and I've put 3 rolls of film through it. And it's a pretty simple camera, and I feel comfortable giving it a review today. So here we go. The KR10 Super is a 35mm single lens reflex camera from the 1980s, which uses the Pentax K-mount system of interchangeable lenses. You can see here I've got a Pentax lens on the camera, which are the best lenses you can buy for Pentax K-mount. If you disagree, let me know. What do you think is better? But I think the great advantage of Ricoh cameras is it's an inexpensive platform for some very good Pentax lenses. In fact, some excellent Pentax lenses. So you release the lens like I just did by pressing this, turning counterclockwise, and just releasing like so. To mount the lens on the camera, you line up that dot with that dot, like so, and quarter turn and click. There you are. There you have it. There are plenty of lenses available in Pentax K-mount. The best ones were the ones made by Pentax, but you've got lots of aftermarket lenses by various companies made in the Pentax K-mount as well. In fact, there are probably more aftermarket lenses made in K-mount than any other. I think that's probably a fair statement. But anyway, so how do I use this thing? Well, first thing you want to do is put batteries in it. The KR10 Super is entirely battery dependent. It requires 2 LR44 alkaline or SR76 silver oxide batteries, which you're going to insert into the battery compartment, as you see here. So here's the battery compartment, and here's your, well, this is an SR76. You notice that on one side of the battery there's some writing, and on the other side of the battery there's not. And the side that doesn't, the side that has the writing should have a plus symbol because that is the positive terminal. And on this particular camera, the positive terminal goes up. So when you put the batteries in the battery carrier, the positive terminal should be facing up, and generally that is the side of the battery with the writing on it. So we then put it in the, like so, just tighten it with my fingers until we got it. Yeah. And it's finger tight. Until just take any old coin and do not force it. Here we go, quarter turn, that's it. Once you feel a little bit of resistance, enough, stop. You don't want to strip the threads on your battery door. Good luck finding replacement parts nowadays. Okay, so I got my batteries in. I want to take some pictures. Also, I've done a separate video on loading film into this camera, so please do see that video where I demonstrate loading a roll of film if you've recently acquired one of these and you want to load your film. So I have a playlist on the channel simply called Loading Film, and that video is there along with a bunch of other videos where I load film into a variety of other cameras. So please do see that. Okay, so let's say I've got some film in, I got the batteries in. Now what? Well, I'm going to put this on A for automatic exposure. Okay. Well, actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on L for lock. This camera doesn't have it is electronically controlled. It is battery dependent, but it does not have an on-off switch. Instead, it has an L, a lock button. And that lock setting does 2 things. Number 1, it turns off the light meter, and it locks out the shutter so that the shutter cannot be released when the L is, when it's set to L, okay? If I set it to, let's say, 1/8 of a second, I should be able to release the shutter. There you go, shutter release, 1/8 of a second. Likewise, 1/25th, yeah. 1,000th, okay. And all the way down to 16 seconds. I'm not going to demonstrate 16 seconds. So now the camera is on A for automatic. Okay, now what? It's on automatic. Does that all I have to do? No. Automatic in these old cameras, generally, the old cameras from the 70s and 80s that had auto exposure were generally either aperture preferred or shutter preferred, which means that as between the shutter speed and the aperture, the photographer set one of those parameters and the camera set the other. In an aperture preferred automatic SLR, the photographer sets the aperture. That is, I prefer the aperture. I think the aperture is more important, so that's why I give control to the photographer. Aperture preferred. And the camera then will set the shutter speed. And it's going to set the shutter speed in a range of from 1/1000th of a second to 16 seconds. And that shutter speed will be set steplessly, such that the actual shutter speed used in any given shot could be any fractional value between 1/1000th and 16th of a second and 16 seconds. Well, how do I know? How do I know what? It's kind of important for me to know that, right? Okay, so fine. I got the camera set to automatic. I'm adjusting my aperture like so. I'm going to look in the viewfinder. And inside the viewfinder, if you'll forgive the state-of-the-art graphics that I use on my channel, nonetheless, this should be sufficient. I don't know why everybody spends so much money on these gee-whiz graphics for their YouTube videos. This ought to get the message across. So I've got, on the right-hand side of the viewfinder, when I look inside the camera, I've got the focusing aids in the center. Here's my split image rangefinder right here. And on Ricoh's split image rangefinder is tilted to a 45-degree angle. That's just a sort of something they did to set themselves apart because it doesn't cost anything and it makes them a little bit different. And some people do like that. Surrounded by a micro prism collar, and you can see here's my artistic representation of a micro prism collar. And then the ground glass is the rest of the field. Those are your focusing aids. Over on the right-hand side, we've got a lot going on here. So let's talk about this. So ordinarily, when I look through the viewfinder, if the camera's off or if there's no battery in it, I'm only going to see this. I'm not going to see these markings. I'm going to see the markings between 1/1000th and LT, and nothing else. And I'll see this orange stripe. And the orange stripe, I just wrote the word orange there. The orange stripe simply is a reminder that between the speeds of 1/30th of a second and LT, you should be careful about hand holding the camera. That's the only reason that orange stripe is there. It's like saying, oh, be careful if you're using one of these shutter speeds, you need a tripod, which may be true depending upon which shutter speed it is and the focal length of your lens and some other factors. But that's the only reason that orange stripe is there. So otherwise you can ignore it. So I'm going to see my shutter speed. My shutter speed's indicated like so. And I will see a bar, a black bar. And that black bar is going to just a simple black bar like so, rather thin. And it's going to appear in the viewfinder to indicate the shutter speed that the camera is going to use. And the black bar will either be between a number or on top of a number. So the black bar moves in basically half stop increments up and down the scale. And let's say, for example, that you're out in the and it's a sunny day and your lens is wide open and you're in 1/1000th of a second just isn't going to cut it. It's too much. It's too much light. Let's say maybe you're using, let's say, ASA 400 film outside on a sunny day with your lens wide open. Well, that's too much light for 400 speed film. So what's going to happen? You're going to see this overexposure mark blink. And that'll blink to indicate too much light, too much light. And you need to shut down the lens a little bit, give it a little less light. Likewise, same thing, underexposure. If you see this arrow blinking, then that means not enough light, and you need to open the lens up a little bit more to let some more light in so that you can get a decent, so you can get proper exposure. And again, the bar moves up and down, indicating the shutter speed that the camera, well, indicating close to the shutter speed that the camera is going to use. Again, the camera may be using any shutter speed between, if the bar is here, then that means that the shutter speed the camera is going to use is somewhere between 1/250th and 1/125th of a second. Could be any fractional value between those two things. If it's right on top of 125, then it's going to be 125th of a second. But if it's above or below, then it's going to be this or somewhere between these two speeds. Though you don't know exactly how much, but not that you really need to. Okay, how about if I want to set my camera manually? Well, the KR10 Super is kind of interesting that way. So as soon as I take the camera off automatic, and I set it to any of the manual speeds, this M appears and blinks. Well, according to the owner's manual, it pulsates, but I just think it blinks. So the M is going to blink, and then these arrows, the overexposure and underexposure arrows, will also blink, depending upon whether the camera's or the light meter's indication of how much, what the proper exposure is. So the M is blinking. Let's say I've got it set to, I've got it set to f8 and 1/60th of a second. Well, and I'm going to see that black bar covering the 60, indicating that I've set it to 1/60th of a second. And I'm also going to see either this arrow or this arrow blink to let me know too much light, not enough light. So for example, if the overexposure arrow is blinking, that means there's too much light. I need to reduce the amount of light. I can either do that by increasing the shutter speed or stopping down the lens. Likewise, if I see this arrow blinking, the underexposure indicator, then not enough light, I can remedy that situation either by selecting a slower shutter speed or opening up the lens just a bit. So I don't need to take my eye off the viewfinder. Well, actually, I sort of do. Sort of yes, sort of no. I mean, I don't see the looking at the viewfinder, I do not see the aperture which I'm using. The aperture is not displayed in the viewfinder of the KR10 Super. Shutter speed, however, is. But the arrows will blink, and it's sort of this is kind of an imitation of the match needle system used by manual exposure cameras of the period, if you're familiar with that. And you basically want to fiddle with your exposure settings until the arrows disappear, in which case you've got proper exposure. Or you can just put it on automatic. Okay, automatic's right there. What else have we got in the viewfinder? We also have, let's see, an indicator for BAT. BAT simply means battery, and if you see that, it means you're low on battery power and you should change your batteries. M is for manual. B is for bulb. I don't know why bulb gets its own special indication in the viewfinder, but it does. And bulb simply means that the shutter will stay open for as long as you depress the shutter release button. So shutter's open, shutter's closed. That's bulb. You also notice that there is a threaded cable release here, so you can use an old-fashioned traditional threaded cable release for long exposures on this camera, if you need to. Okay, so manual, bulb, plus minus. Well, what's the plus minus symbol? Again, that doesn't ordinarily appear in the viewfinder. If it does, if you see the plus minus, what it means is that your exposure compensation is off of 0. So over here on the top plate, you've got the shutter speed dial here, advanced lever, film counter or exposure counter, and the ASA setting and the exposure compensation setting. So ASA I set by pulling up on this and adjusting like so. And ASA simply means American Standards Association. It's the same as ISO, which means International Standards Organization. Name changed, but the practical value of the number is the same. The exposure compensation is generally used for, the most common situation would be backlighting. If I'm shooting a subject which I know is backlit and I know that the background lighting is going to fool the light meter, then I might tell the camera to give it 1 extra stop or 2 extra stops of light, and I do that via the exposure compensation function like so. I personally don't use exposure compensation. If I'm not going to use the automatic setting, I'll just switch to manual, but some people do find it useful. For example, I'll give you an example of how it might be useful. When I first got this camera, I tested the light meter, and the way that I don't have a testing equipment, I just did the quick and dirty test. And the quick and dirty test is this, and you can do it too. Set the lens for f/16, set your ISO or ASA to 125, go outside on a nice sunny day, no filter in front of the lens. Outside on a nice sunny day, meter some typical cityscapes, landscapes, whatever, and the camera should be suggesting shutter speed of 1/125th. Sunny 16, f/16, 125 on the film speed should be indicating 1/125th of a second in the shutter speed indication. If it doesn't, then your camera's a bit off. And when I did that, I noticed that this camera seemed to be underexposing by maybe a third of a stop or half a stop or just a wee bit. So what I did was I loaded this camera up with some Ilford Pan 100, which I like to expose at at exposure index 50. Developing Perceptol, which is a good combination for me. It fits my style. So I just set the ISO 1/3 slower. And by setting it 1/3 slower, I'm telling the camera, give me an extra third of a stop of light. And the reason I told the camera to do that was because I thought the exposure meter was underexposing by just a wee bit. And I did that, and the exposures came out fine. However, another way I could do that, I could simply set my exposure index to 50, which is where I wanted it, and then adjust the exposure compensation. And if I want to give it a little bit more light, there we go, 1/3 of a stop, overexposure, same effect. Now, I don't like using this dial because there's no lockout function on it. A lot of cameras of this era, there was a locking button that you had to press in order to change exposure compensation. This dial you can accidentally knock it off register, which I did while shooting one day, and I looked at the viewfinder and I noticed that this was visible. I'm like, well, what's that doing there? Why am I seeing that? And then I looked at the top of the camera, and it was set off by maybe a third of a stop or what have you. So I just reset it, and okay, now I know to keep an eye on that. Very good. So automatic, bulb, lockout. There's no on-off button. I mentioned that. One of the things I do like about this camera is that to activate the light meter, there is a dedicated button on the top. On the front of the camera right here. So again, put my film in. I'm ready to shoot. I've got it on automatic. How do I know what my shutter speed is going to be? If I want to check my shutter speed, press that button, and it activates the light meter, and it activates all the functions that I've been describing over here. There's no off button, sort of. The camera will stay on, according to the owner's manual, it'll stay on for 8 minutes after it's activated. If you want to shut it off before that, put it on L. So when I'm using this camera, I keep it on L just as a default. When I'm putting it in or out of the bag, I put it on L just to prevent an accidental firing or accidentally tripping the shutter. And then, as I'm ready to shoot, switch from L to A. And that was easy enough. Very simple. Okay, all right, so we've covered what I think we need to cover for our video. That's the basic functionality of this camera. I do feel obligated to mention, when I talk about these Ricoh cameras with electronic shutters, that about maybe 2 years ago, roughly, Yuho of Camera Rescue, in an interview he gave with Nico Yacera, mentioned that 90% of the Ricoh cameras coming into Camera Rescue were non-functional, dead on arrival. Simply just would not work, would not turn on, wouldn't do anything. Paperweights. So that's kind of a big deal. A 90% failure rate is something to take notice of. Now this particular camera right here, it works fine. Put 3 rolls of film through it without any difficulty. But if you've already got one, and that's why you're watching this video, then that's fine. But if you're in the market to buy one, I recommend caution. The Ricohs are apparently unreliable in terms of their electronics. You know, this thing could die tomorrow, who knows? But it's inexpensive. If you can get one inexpensively, it's a nicely featured camera. I mean, it's basic, it's simple, but it's got what you need, and it's got, you know, it's a nice inexpensive platform for K-mount lenses. That's the way I think of it. And it does have an automatic exposure function for those who have not yet mastered, manual exposure. So it's a good camera for beginners, but again, just don't overpay. Don't overpay for a Ricoh, in my recommendation. But other than that, this particular camera I've been very happy with, and I've enjoyed using it. So that's my 2 cents worth on the KR10 Super. I hope you found this video informative or amusing or helpful or some combination thereof. And if so, please do like and subscribe. And as always, check out the links down below. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.